Hey guys, welcome back to Generation Y. Just a little bit more information for some of you guys to have a think about, just so that you know, just so that you feel a bit more informed when, sort of putting together your opinion on what's going on, and also so that you can try and understand just a bit more about the actual conflict and the Ukraine, recent events over the last sort of 10 years in Ukraine itself. So many people have heard the fact that the US spent in the region of $5 billion to, they said that it was to bring democracy and freedom to Ukraine. Most people would quite rightly say that was to essentially put in their own man. So we have this article from FAIR. I'm just going to read a couple of different extracts from it, and I really do think you should go and have a read. I'll leave a link in the description. But yeah, this is pretty mind blowing. This will blow your mind, I feel. So at the start of it, it essentially just says, "But what role does the West have to play in what's going on in Ukraine?" The backdrop of the 2014 coup and annexation cannot be understood without looking at the US strategy to open Ukrainian markets to foreign investors and give control of its economy to giant multinational corporations. A key tool for this has been the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which leverages aid loans to push governments to adopt policies friendly to foreign investors. The IMF is funded by and represents Western financial capital and governments, and has been at the forefront of efforts to reshape economies around the world for decades, often with disastrous results. The civil war in Yemen and the coup in Bolivia both followed a rejection of IMF terms. In Ukraine, the IMF had long planned to implement a series of economic reforms to make the country more attractive to investors. These included cutting wage controls, i.e. lowering wages, reforming and reducing health and education sectors, which made up the bulk of employment in Ukraine, and cutting natural gas subsidies to Ukrainian citizens that made energy affordable to the general public. Coup plotters like US Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland repeatedly stressed the need for the Ukrainian government to enact the necessary reforms. In 2013, after early steps to integrate with the West, Ukraine President Viktor Yanukovych turned against these changes and ended trade integration talks with the European Union months before his overthrow. Here, he started economic negotiations with Russia, in a major snub to the Western economic sphere. By then, the nationalist protests were heating up that would go on to topple his government. After the 2014 coup, the new government quickly restarted the EU deal. After cutting heating subsidies in half, it secured a $27 billion investment from the IMF. The IMF's goals still include reducing the role of the state and vested interests in the economy, in order to attract more foreign capital. The IMF is one of the many global institutions whose role in maintaining global inequities often goes unreported and unnoticed by the general public. The US economic quest to open global markets to capital is a key driver of international affairs. But if the press chooses to ignore it, the public debate is incomplete and shallow. And then the next one, the US helped overthrow Ukraine's elected president. During the tug-of-war between the US and Russia, the Americans were engaged in a destabilization campaign against the Yanukovych government. The campaign culminated with the overthrow of the elected president in the Maidan Revolution, also known as the Maidan coup, named for the Kiev square that hosted the bulk of the protests. As political turmoil engulfed the country in the lead-up to 2014, the US was fueling anti-government sentiment through mechanisms like USAID and National Endowment for Democracy. It's always about democracy, just as they had done in 2004. In December 2013, Nuland, Assistant Secretary of State at the time for European Affairs, and a long-time regime change advocate, said that the US government had spent $5 billion promoting democracy in Ukraine since 1991. The money went towards supporting senior officials in the Ukraine government, members of the business community, as well as the opposition civil society, who agree with US goals. So essentially, blackmail. They were paying off politicians, they were paying off business people, and they were paying off activists, if you like. The NED is a key organisation in the network of American soft power that pours $170 million a year into organisations dedicated to defending or installing US-friendly regimes. The Washington Post's David Ignatius once wrote that the organisation functions by doing in public what the CIA used to do in private. The NED targets governments who oppose US military or economic policy. So all you have to do to end up at war is not want to make US corporations an absolute ton of money. The NED board of directors includes Elliot Abrams, whose sordid record runs from the Iran-Contra affair in the 80s to the Trump administration's effort to overthrow the Venezuelan government. In 2013, NED President Carl Gershman wrote a piece in the Washington Post that described Ukraine as the biggest prize in the East-West rivalry. After the Obama administration, Newland joined the NED board of directors before returning to the State Department in the Biden administration as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. One of many recipients of NED money for projects in Ukraine was the International Republican Institute, the IRI, once chaired by Senator John McCain. Has long had a hand in US regime change operations. During the protests that eventually brought down the government, McCain and other US officials personally flew into the Ukraine to encourage protesters. So here is a leaked phone call, which involves current Secretary of State Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt, two of these nefarious characters. This is back in 2014, arranged by Joe Biden, and this is them discussing who should run Ukraine and who they will put in to run Ukraine.
What do you think?
I think we're in play. The Klitschko piece is obviously the complicated electron here, especially the announcement of him as deputy prime minister. And you've seen some of my notes on the troubles in the marriage right now, so we're trying to get a read really fast on where he is on this stuff. But I think your argument to him, which you'll need to make, I think that's the next phone call we want to set up, is exactly the one you made to Yachts. And I'm glad you sort of put him on the spot on where he fits in this scenario. And I'm very glad he said what he said in response.
Good. So I don't think Kleitsch should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think, what, in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tony Book and his guys. And, you know, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yachts is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, you know, what he needs is Kleitsch and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week, you know. I just think Kleitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay, good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a call with him as the next step?
My understanding from that call, but you tell me, was that the big three were going into their own meeting, and that Yachts was going to offer in that context a three-way, you know, the 3+1 conversation or 3+2 with you. Is that not how you understood it?
No, I mean, that's what he proposed, but I think just knowing the dynamic that's been with them where Klitschko has been the top dog, he's going to take a while to show up for whatever meeting they've got, and he's probably talking to his guys at this point. So I think you reaching out directly to him helps with the personality management among the three, and it gives you also a chance to move fast on all this stuff and put us behind it before they all sit down and he explains why he doesn't like it.
Okay, good. I'm happy. Why don't you reach out to him and see if he wants to talk before or after?
Okay, will do. Thanks.
Okay, I've now written, one more wrinkle for you, Jeff.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I told you this or if I only told Washington this, that when I talked to Jeff Feltman this morning, he had a new name for the UN guy, Robert Seri. Did I write you that this morning?
Yeah,
okay.
I saw that.
he's now gotten both Seri and Ban Ki-moon to agree that Seri could come in Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, the EU.
No, exactly. And I think we've got to do something to make it stick together, because you can be pretty sure that if it does start to gain altitude, the Russians will be working behind the scenes to try to torpedo it. And again, the fact that this is out there right now, I'm still trying to figure out in my mind why Yanukovych did that. But in the meantime, there's a Party of Regions faction meeting going on right now, and I'm sure there's a lively argument going on in that group at this point. But anyway, we could land jelly side up on this one if we move fast. So let me work on Klitschko, and if you can just keep, I think we want to try to get somebody with an international personality to come out here and help to midwife this thing. And then the other issue is some kind of outreach to Yanukovych, but we probably regroup on that tomorrow as we see how things start to fall into place.
So on that piece, Jeff, when I wrote the note, Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So
Okay.
Biden's willing.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thanks.
So, yeah, if that doesn't give you a pretty open-eyed insight into what's been going on in Ukraine, I mean, really for the last 30 years, but a very, very active role over the last 8 or 9, I mean, I don't know what will. We essentially know that the US has been choosing what goes on in Ukraine, and now we are where we are again. And as you can see there, it's happened before, and it almost always ends up in war. And I suppose, how long can you interfere with people's politics and their ways of life before they're going to push back? And it's ironic because I remember Victoria Nuland saying this.
There is no doubt in my mind, Senator, and it is classic Russian technique to blame on the other guy what they're planning to do themselves.
So that kind of seems a little bit ironic. Anyway, let me know if you guys actually knew much about this. Let me know if it changes any of your opinions, if you found it informative or interesting. Anyway, thanks, and I will see you again soon.
Winston stopped writing, partly because he was suffering from cramp. He did not know what had made him pour out this stream of rubbish